Hello there everyone and welcome to the LightKit Pro 3 training series. In this video we're going to be going over the light in LightKit Pro. The purpose of this is going to be to kind of tackle every single setting in there, do a really technical overview of what each button does. Be sure to check out some of the videos from Chad, the quick start, and some of the more artistic videos to maybe get more of a workflow of lighting things and be a little more artistic. These are the more technical videos. Now right away we've got this nice little monster here that's included with LightKit from the browser, just something for us to be lighting as we go. But to start out with, why don't we go ahead and actually I'm going to go and delete these. I'm assuming that you just finished doing the install video and you're checking out how to use LightKit here. The first thing that we want to do is throughout most of these videos, we are going to be going under the assumption that you have already put the LightKit Pro 3 load palette. You already clicked this and you've already loaded those into your interface. I'm going to click it. I'm going to drag our lights over and our cycs over. Let's go ahead and close that, and I'm going to go Window, Customize, Save as Startup Layout, and now those icons will be there all the time. These give you access to all the lights, the LightKit Studio, the LightKit browser, and all the cycs really quickly instead of kind of hunting the plugin menu, tracking it down, going to these flyouts. Now, having said that, we are going to go ahead and start playing with our basic light. So let's go ahead and click on this flyout, and you can load any of these immediately, but it's important to note that all the different light types inside of LightKit can swap between each other. So let's just start out by creating a softbox square, and let's go ahead and zoom out, and you can see that we've got a softbox set up in here. Now, the first thing to note is whatever your current renderer is set to in your render settings. So if I go ahead and hit Command or Control B, I'm just going to pop this open. You can see I'm already in standard, but you can go to physical. If you were in Redshift, then this will be created in Redshift. If you're in Octane, it'll be created in Octane. Now, once again, LightKit is created to work with standard, physical, Octane, Arnold, and Redshift. It's very, very important to note that we are keeping LightKit 3 up to date on the most up-to-date version of all those third-party renderers. So if you're working on an older version of Octane, maybe they changed the way brightness works. Maybe they changed a setting and it just won't work. And potentially those third-party renderers, Cinema 4D is very stable. The third-party renderers, they're a little more prone to crashing. So that's always possible. Make sure you're the most up-to-date version of LightKit and the most up-to-date version of those third-party renderers. But in any case, we've got our softbox, and it was created at standard and physical right out of the gate, ready to go. LightKit works in version R14 all the way up. Now you can change your renderer from this setting, whichever one you are on by default. That's what's going to automatically apply, but let's go ahead and leave it at standard physical and look at some of our settings. We're just going to go through these kind of like one by one as long as it makes sense. So let's go ahead to our first one, which is going to be POV placement. If I click on that, our perspective is going to jump to that of the light. And now you can see I can actually move around my model and light it. And it's going to get darker as I move away and brighter as I get closer. And we place this light exactly where we want to. And if I click on POV placement again, we're going to zip out of the light, and I can see we've placed it over in that new location. And so now we could go and click on our menu and click on, let's say, a ring light, and that ring light's created where that one used to be. And let's go ahead and maybe just move that off to the side, and I can go and click on an umbrella light. And now we've got 3 different lights in there. I can move this over, and our object is being lit up. And now we can talk about our next setting, which is solo. Any button that whichever light I'm on, if I go ahead and I click the solo button, then the other lights are going to be put into layers and it's going to be automatically hidden so we can look at just the light that we're working on. Now that we've got that going, we could go and make tweaks to the lighting. We could change the color, really dial in just this one light, make it look exactly the way we want to. And then we can click the solo button again and all the other ones will appear back in. Now what's additionally nifty about this is we can actually grab any given light, well we can move those around, but instead of clicking the solo button, we can actually just double click on any icon of the actual lights themselves and it will automatically solo that one. So I can click on this one, I can make that one blue, see exactly how that looks, maybe make this a little closer, get that nice and bright. And now I want to solo my softbox. I can double click on that one and it's automatically going to jump the solo to that softbox and we can light that one up exactly how we want to. When we're all done with that, just double click on the light that has been soloed and it's going to turn them all off and all of our lights reappear and we've got this ready to rock, super easy placement, really cool looking, and just a really great workflow. Next up is a question mark button, which will send you to the training page, which is what you're probably on right now watching this video. Next up, we have our viewport mode. our viewport mode is to maybe the lights are eating up some of your screen real estate. This one isn't too bad, but okay, maybe this umbrella, it's getting a little bit in your way and you want to be able to see it here and not have it blocking. So you can click on the umbrella in the viewport, and you can right away, we can click from detailed to medium. We're going to kind of get this boxy view of the light casting onto our monster here. And now we can see through it. It's not eating up too much space. We can grab this light over here, and I can say, you know what? I want this to be in the minimal view. And now it's a very minimal, just kind of an outline there. Now what's great about setting those modes is if you go ahead and you hit render, they are still existing fully. All their geometry is there. When you send them out to the viewport, you can barely see the back of this, but you can see there's a little bit of light where that's casting, and this umbrella was still there. So those will still show up fully in your finals. It's just a good way of them hiding from your viewport. I'm going to go ahead and set those both up to detailed again. Next up, we have our mount type. So we've got a ceiling set by default, but I can go ahead and switch this to floor. And that is going, let me actually click floor. And now you can see that it's going to swap to a floor stand. And it's a little tiny right now, but I can click on this handle and make it a little bit bigger. And now we are working from a floor stand. We will talk more about those stands when we get to the mount tab. Next up is switching our light types. Like I said, any light can be swapped to any other type of light. So I can go ahead and click on this drop down and say I want a ring light. It'll automatically swap to that. Or we can click on these icons and jump to all the different light types via that. Very quick to do. Important to note that this final one is an ambient light, which is pretty different than the rest of them. If I click on that, you see it's automatically going to jump to 000, and it creates an ambient light everywhere. And you see there's a lot less settings on that one. But in any case, I can click back on our different, back onto a softbox. It's going to pop back into position, and we are ready to continue. Now, an important thing to note is a concept that we've kind of introduced in Light Kit 3 is the idea of separating your cast light from your reflected light. And this is really important for a couple of reasons, but let's go ahead and check this out. And it's going to be easiest to see if maybe we turn on a third-party renderer. So I'm actually going to grab all three of our lights, and I'm going to say, you know what? I want you to be in redshift, and it's going to switch out those modes. Now, I've already got a material applied on this monster, and it's already a redshift material. I already had that prepped. But now I can go ahead into our redshift renderer, and I can turn on my render view, and now we kind of popped open this redshift IPR setting, and we go ahead and turn on, hit play, start or stop the IPR, and it's going to update, load all that in, and now as we rotate our camera and we move lights around, then this IPR is automatically going to update for us. Now that we got the model loaded in, it's looking all really nice here. So we're going to mostly worry about this nice soft box off to the side and talk about cast light and reflected light. Now the cast light is kind of just the light coming off the light object. So we can go ahead and crank that up, and you see it's going to get way brighter. We can pull it way down. It's going to get way dimmer. But let's go ahead and pull this way down, and you can see we actually see these reflections. We've got these really light reflections showing up on it. And that is the reflected intensity. We can go ahead and crank that up, and now you see that that is even higher, and we can type in even higher numbers than that. Let's make it 3 times brighter than that. And now, even though he's not very reflective, he has a very bright reflection from this light. So we've decoupled the cast light from the reflected light, so you can really get a nice bling from a light, or you'd be like, you know what? I don't want much reflection from that, almost none, and you really pull that out. And then on top of that, we have our master intensity, and this is a multiplier. Our master intensity is a multiplier on the other two, so we can brighten them and dim them overall, but we wanted the primary control to be brightening them individually. Now, moving on, we have samples. Samples will automatically adapt based on your renderer. Redshift, its basic samples are usually 64, but if you were, say, in Octane or Arnold, that's a different number of samples, and these sliders will tie directly in with that. Next up is pretty straightforward. It's our color, so I can go ahead and click on that, and we can manually set that to something like green, but we've got a nice kind of Kelvin scale set up in here, so you can say, I want a warm light, or I want a cool light, or you can click on the middle and just jump right back to white light. And really easy and quick to do that. Next up, we've got a normalize, and normalize is not something that you see normally in a basic standard in physical, but it's in all the third-party renderers, and we made it work in physical. So what this does is right now, if I were to grab, in fact, why don't we isolate that light? I can double click on it, isolate it, and boom, see it real nice there in the IPR. But now I can hit T for scale and scale it up, and you see that even though the light's getting bigger, this isn't getting any brighter. So the scale of the light is independent from the brightness. Now, it's important to note that all of our lights and all of our presets inside the browser are all assuming a normalized workflow turned on. But you can turn it off, and if I turn that off here, you see it's going to set to kind of a different brightness. But now if I scale this light up bigger, it's actually getting brighter. And if we make it smaller, it's actually getting dimmer. But once again, our overall workflow is assuming that you do have it turned on, so we're going to go and leave that on. Next up is size and placement, and this is something I really love inside of this new version of LightKit. Let's see if we can see this in the viewport a little bit better. I'll kind of see both. First of all, you've seen I've been kind of navigating around. I'm going to move this down. I've been kind of navigating around in the viewport just by hitting the letter E for move, and I can just grab my light and move it anywhere in the scene that I want to. You see we're getting really nice feedback in our IPR. And we're just getting this really great navigation. It's a really fun, intuitive way of moving your light around. An important thing to note with LightKit 3 over the previous light kits is that the axis of the previous light kits used to be at the center, and you had to control it via the sliders, but now our axis is right on the light. So we can move it around. It's constantly targeting the center by default. We can also grab the arrows and move those around. It's just working nice and intuitively. But you'll see if I click over onto our light kit settings here on the softbox and I move it around, you see that we've got some sliders that are automatically updating to match what we've got here. So you can actually jump over here now and we can increase or decrease our distance. We can grab our rotation and spin around exactly from where we were around the object. And we can grab our pitch and go up to 90 degrees overhead or 90 degrees on the ground. We can also go negative by dragging it down and up. And you'll see all this time that the stand is automatically adapting and going to the placement, the exact placement of where that light is. We've also got tilt, so we can tilt the light from one side to the other. We can go negative if we want to. And we've got an overall scale slider to really quickly change the height and width simultaneously. Now, that's all using target. We've got target turned on by default, but we can actually turn off target, and now it's no longer trying to get to that center point. So now if I were to grab, say, this red handle and move it off to the side, you see it's not rotating, it's just moving. So that's a nice, clean way of just getting basic movement, kind of like a classic Cinema 4D light, where you can really easily move this, change it however we want. But at any point, I can click back on the light and say, you know what, I want to target again. And now it's targeting right back to the middle. And that's all working well, but we can go ahead and do something like target an object. So I'm going to click on this little arrow. We can click on our nice little monster guy here, and now it is targeting that monster. So I can grab that monster and I can move him up into the air, and you see the light is automatically adapting to aim wherever it is. I can undo, and as another targeting option, we can go ahead and clear that out, and you can always hit this create button and that'll create a null right where that target already is, and now you can kind of independently move that around without moving your object. And you'll see that's automatically named whatever your softbox is. One thing I should note is the name is pretty cool and it's adaptive. I don't know. Let's say this is a softbox right. I'm going to name it right just so I know it's the one that's on the right. But if I change my light to these other types, let's say an umbrella, it's going to find kind of the keyword here being softbox and replace that with umbrella. So you don't need to lose your custom naming, but it will still adapt to it. If you completely override it with a custom name, it'll just remain your custom name. But now I can rename that and it's going to be softbox right all the time, which is pretty cool. Anyway, so we got all those controls. We got our targeting, which we can turn on and off, rotate scale. Next up is the softbox tab. Now, this actually is the settings for each individual light. The softbox has the most settings, but different lights will have different ones. For instance, if we click on the umbrella, then we're going to get settings for the umbrella, let's say radius and the offset. So how far in or out is this light? So we pull that in and out. And we can also change the fabric to different types of material like metallic, and we have the gradients we control. But let's jump back to our softbox and talk about those because these are the most interesting. So again, nice big giant softbox going on right now. We can individually control the height and width, and we can control our corners. And in fact, actually something really cool that I should talk about before we do that is let's go ahead and move our light over a little bit. T for scale, scale it down. Is we have our handles here, and something that might be nice. I'm going to temporarily turn off the IPR, and let's set this back to the viewport. I'm sorry, standard physical for the renderer, because now we can see it really nicely in the viewport. And I want to point out that we have some controls here that we can drag. We've got handles built in now. So we can drag this handle up and down, and we can see the brightness changing. Now, of course, things like the Redshift and Octane and whatnot, they have their IPRs and their render views. So you're expected to be running that. And the viewport itself tends not to look very good. But meanwhile, standard and physical looks really good in Cinema 4D viewport. So this is going to give you some nice feedback as far as that's concerned. But you can control the height. We can control the width. And then we can control the rounding And we've also got this nice fancy setting here, which is a soft edge. And you can see that translating here as well. These other lights are casting light on it, but that's actually a nice fade off on it. Let's go ahead and shift this back to Redshift so that we can take a look at it again. Let's open up our render view and reinitialize it and take a look at some of these settings via their sliders. So here's a soft edge. You can see as I pull this in, we're actually fading that edge in. It's a really nice additional control that we didn't used to have. Next up, we have our rounding, which is just how round it is. So very square, round, but we have our different corner types. So I could say I want a hard edged one. And now as I pull this in, you're going to see that's actually kind of these 45-degree angles cutting in. And we can change it to rounded, and it's going to be perfect round bevels, very clean, kind of a classic kind of rounding there. But then we've got our new setting, which is soft, which is pretty cool. And it just gives you these nice soft edges on the edge where everything kind of tilts in just that little bit. Really like the way that that looks. Next up, we've got the number of sides for our object. So in the past, softboxes we always had as 4 sides, but we can go ahead and change that up to 5 sides. And you see it turns into a radius from there. I don't really see 5-sided softboxes, but maybe 6-sided isn't too weird, but definitely 8. That's one that we see. And even these still have their parametric rounding. We can round these out. It still has a soft edge. We can pull those in. We can round those out a little bit. Get nice soft boxes. So we've kind of got an arbitrary number of edges here. I think we can shoot up to like near 100. And interestingly, if you drag your slider, which is in the reasonable range of 10 to 4, you can even drop it down one and get to a triangle one. So, the math allowed it. So we were like, why not? Let's leave it in there. Anyway, we can go back to 4. Next up, we've got our imperfection slider. So we can kind of mess up our surface or make it really clean. Crank that up all the way, make it really messed up. Next up, we have our gradient and the different types of gradients, the way they're kind of overall applied. So we can go ahead and change our color here. In fact, why don't we leave that one white? And I'm going to get rid of our soft edge, but let's go ahead and change this to something red colored. And now we're going to see a red falling off to white. This mostly helps with reflection, but what's really cool in addition is we can change our type to, let's say, V. So now we got a gradient going from left to right. We could right click and invert our knots. Now it's going to go the other direction. Depending on the renderer, it'll show different types here because not all renderers have all types. In fact, Redshift doesn't have a box type, so that's not here. But in addition to using this gradient, we can also use our soft edge and we can fade out on top of the gradient. So those two kind of combine in really interesting ways. Okay, and so that's the type and gradient. Next up is shadow options. Standard physical actually has the most options because all the other ones just kind of do lights for real, where standard physical is faking it a little bit more. So we've got our area lights, we've got soft, hard, and then different densities. You'll see when I shift this over to Redshift that we only have 2 settings. Are there shadows and what's the density of them? Different renderers have different settings there. Moving on, I guess we're done with this tab, so we can jump on over into the Mount tab. So this one is pretty straightforward. We can change our different mount types. So right now we're on a floor. We can click it back into the ceiling. We can drag it up into the air. We can grab these different handles and change kind of the scale of them to adapt to our scene, depending on how we want that to look. There's a couple of pretty cool features here. You'll see if I zoom out, if I start pulling this upward, it's going to stretch, but at a certain point, it stretches beyond the point it wants to, and it's going to start creating additional segments. And then those can animate up and down nice and cleanly. If I were to drag this down to the point where they can't all fit, it's going to start erasing them out automatically and then drawing it back again. So it's kind of automatically adaptive there. Now, you probably noticed, well, and then these settings are all just kind of linking with that. The only one that's not directly controlled here would be our segments, so we can add in extra segments if we need extra segments for there. Also, we've got our maximum, just in case you dragged it really far or shrunk the light really tiny. We don't want it to suddenly have an overwhelming amount where it slows down so much, so we've clamped it at 100, but you can increase the amount. And then you've probably seen that as I'm moving my light around, that mount is disappearing, the stand or the ceiling mount disappears. And that's just because we are generating all of this geometry every refresh that you're moving it around, and we didn't want it to slow down if it didn't have to. But let's say you're doing an animation and you want to see those moving around. You can go ahead and turn off hide while moving, and now you'll see it's automatically moving around. Now I got a nice fast system here, and this is one light, a very simple scene, so it's very light, and you can see I'm moving around. But if you were to grab 10 lights at the same time, you might get some slowdown because this is generating lots of geometry. It's generating light. It's generating materials. There's a lot going on, so keep that in mind as you're moving this stuff around. Okay, so that one is done. We can go ahead and jump into our advanced tab now. We got some different things to talk about in this one for sure. First of all, let's go back and actually let's solo a different light and let's just play with a different one. So now we've got a ring light here. It's nice and close to our monster. Zoom up a little bit and let's look at some additional settings. So if we go to advanced, something you'll see is that, we've got a plugin here, but we're locking away a lot of the objects. This object has materials. It has a light inside it that's casting the cast light. And we didn't want to hide that away in case there's like power users that have a setting that they want to go change and that we're not giving you access to. So you can click on the expose light checkbox, and whatever renderer you're currently in, it's going to expose your light. So no longer is it inside the plugin, it's been pulled out and made a child. So it's automatically linked up here, but now you can click on the actual light and go and change settings. So maybe you want it to be bidirectional, or maybe you want to turn on some sort of glow, or you want it to be seen in the specular. You can go ahead and change those individually in the light. But I don't want to do that, so I'm going to unexpose the light. Next up is diffuse light, which is kind of the cast light. If I turn that off, the only thing that's being cast is the reflection. And then if you're in standard physical, we also have the GI light, which is going to be turning on, the ability for it to be casting GI or not. But anyway, back to redshift. We go back to advanced. So this one is important. We've got different geometry types. I'm actually going to create a sky so we can kind of see. Hopefully that shows up in the background. I'm not sure if redshift will acknowledge it. Let's just give it a second to process. Doesn't seem to. Maybe if we throw... No, it doesn't seem to like it at all. So never mind on that. I want to just kind of see our light a little bit better. But instead we'll just spin around so it's kind of behind the monster. So next up, we've got our geometry, our actual geometry. So if we go into our viewport, this is what's actually there. You remember in our light, in our viewport mode, it was changing the way it looked, but it still rendered the same. But if we go to our advanced and go to our geometry, I can actually say, you know what? I only want to see the surface of the light. So it is now no longer generating a mount. It's no longer generating the extra geometry. And depending on the light that you're in, you can see that let's say the softbox is just the surface of the softbox. The other geometry is not existing and it will not render. So maybe there's a lot of power users out there who are like, you know what, I don't need these bells and whistles. I just want my cast light and the reflection. So that's a great mode to switch it to. We've also got the simplest one, which is cast light. So now we don't even have the reflection. We just have the actual light there ready to cast. So the most minimal, the least intensive in your viewport. But for the most part, I like keeping everything on. Next up, we have our compositing settings, really quick compositing tag type stuff. So we're going to skip over the first one and go to scene by camera. I can turn that off, and you'll see our monster here doesn't look any different if we turn it on or off. But it itself is no longer seen in the viewport. Next up, we have scene by transparency, pretty self-explanatory. Will the light be seen behind glass? Scene by reflection, will it be seen in reflections? And then geo shadow is, should the geometry of the light itself cast a shadow? So if we had a different light here casting light, this light would cast a shadow on the floor. So you can turn that off as well. So as long as we're in compositing, let's talk about this expose tag. Just like the exposed light, we want you to have full access to compositing tags when you need them. Now, each renderer has its own compositing tag. Different renderers have different settings. So Octane, for instance, doesn't have scene by transparency or reflection or geometry shadow. So those don't show up. But if you wanted to put on, let's say, a custom object buffer or something, in which case I'm going to go back to standard physical just so we can see that. If I click on expose tag, it's actually going to turn off visibility compositing. And instead of us having internal compositing tags, we now have an external compositing tag. So you can go ahead and turn on whichever settings you want, turn on the object buffer. That's ready to rock. And you can, once again, customize even deeper if you need to. But in this instance, I don't want to do that. So I'm going to delete it. I'm going to go back into my light and I'm going to turn on our ability to customize them. And I guess we'll go back to redshift. Lastly, here we have our studio color. Should the icon automatically adapt to the color of the studio? I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that because this is great feedback right there in the viewport. And then we've also got our studio or the icon color. If you wanted to customize it for some reason, you can click on this and make it a crazy green color, and you're gonna see it's going to turn green. If you want to go back to normal, you just crank it back to white, and it's going to adapt to whatever color it is. And we've got our final setting here, which is under project. So under here, we can go ahead and feed objects in. So for instance, let's go ahead and make a character right there. And let's also apply that same redshift material to them. So now under our softbox, I could be like, you know what? I don't want that guy to be seen by these different settings, and those will turn off. His reflection is still being seen. But we can go ahead and exclude objects and include objects via that setting. So yeah, include, exclude, and we can turn on the shadow or the reflection or the specular, or I guess not specular, just be reflection and cast light. And turn off the shadow independently on them as long as the renderer is actually capable of that. So I think that pretty much covers everything involved in the basics of the light. Remember, you can go ahead and click on any given light. You can change it to all different modes. You can click on the different modes here. If you want to create new lights, you can click on the menu and grab any of them from default here. And also the studio object can create lights, but we're going to talk about the studio object in the next video. So I think that will wrap this one up, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.